Hi, everyone. We are back. So today is Tuesday, September 17th. Tashira and I recorded a full-length episode yesterday on the ongoing Diddy civil cases and what was happening with the federal investigation, specifically about the Don Richard civil lawsuit against Diddy. Remember, Don Richard was another member of Danity Kane, and she alleged with very specific details that are consistent with other allegations that we have heard about through other civil lawsuits, some of the abuse and isolation and terror that Diddy inflicted on her and other members of the girl group while he was running it. And we talked about some interesting facets of this civil case. However, this morning we all woke up, it's Tuesday, and we heard that Diddy was arrested in New York. And so we wanted to talk about the arrest, to talk about what it means, to talk about what we know and what we don't know, and then talk about how this may or may not be part and parcel or impact that the civil cases that are ongoing. So late last night, so I believe technically on September 16th, Diddy was arrested in the lobby of a New York hotel. I think it was the Park Hyatt. And the indictment is under seal, meaning we don't know what the charges are. We don't have any names of any alleged victims, and we can only hypothesize about what is going on. But here's what we know. He was arrested. He was in New York, and he is not primarily in New York anymore. Remember, he has houses in Miami and LA. We know this, obviously, because one of or two of his homes were raided, one in Miami, one in LA, a few short months ago. And so a lot of people were wondering what is going on with that investigation. So what we hypothesized yesterday was exactly what it was happening, that the investigation was ongoing. And there was a coordinated investigation that involved many states. That's my hypothesis. We also know that Diddy and his attorneys knew that the arrest was pending, or that there was a possibility of the arrest, because we know through his attorneys that he was specifically in New York this week because there was this chance of an arrest. And that's interesting, right? I think there's a lot of reasons why, well, two things, right? His attorneys put that out there for bail purposes. So one of the factors when a judge is determining whether to issue bail, meaning a money bail, or hold someone without bail, is whether someone is a flight risk, meaning that they're going to just up and leave the state. So for most people, not celebrities, that means leave a state. But for someone like Diddy, who has access to private planes, he obviously has a passport, he obviously has access to places all over the world. He really is a flight risk under normal circumstances. So in my mind, his attorneys putting it out there that they were aware of the investigation, they were aware that an arrest might happen, and they put Diddy in a public place to get arrested, is to show a judge and the U.S. attorney in New York that he is not a flight risk. That's my hypothesis. So he has not been arraigned yet. He has not been formally charged. That will likely happen either today or within the next few days. And my hypothesis is that his attorneys are going to vigorously argue for bail and vigorously argue that New York is an appropriate place for Diddy to live because he has a lot of connections, he has a home there, and that he can stay put in New York and not be a flight risk. We don't know. The indictment, meaning the formal charges, are under seal. And so I imagine a lot of people have questions about why, right? Now he's arrested, and will those charges be released? And probably they will. I don't know how many details about the charges will be released because remember, we know this was a multi-state investigation. We know from the civil lawsuits that there are reasonably multiple victims, and many of those victims may be easily identifiable, which means they might be at risk, either physically or emotionally at risk because of who knows why, but also maybe the investigation could be tampered with. And what do I mean by tampering or witness tampering? Meaning someone either directly from Diddy's team, Diddy, or just someone, we don't know on if it could get to those witnesses or victims and induce them or give them some reason not to participate in the investigation. What would that look like? Well, we know another member of Danity came, I believe, over the weekend came out saying that she didn't see any of the things that Don Richard alleged. And the statement was so formal that a reasonable inference, or we reasonably inferred that a lawyer wrote it, which to me means that Diddy's attorneys got to her, paid her off, and without any judgment to her, and required her as part of the payoff to release a statement. So there's a real risk that this will happen in the criminal investigation as well. One, because Diddy is very well known. Two, he's very powerful. We know this. And three, there are murmurs that there are a lot of other artists who were bystanders or potentially involved. Remember, we talked a couple months ago about a lawsuit, I believe, out of Nevada, but I could be wrong, by a man alleging harm by Diddy and some other people in the music industry. So there are real reasons why the U.S. attorney or the prosecutor in this case might want to keep the indictment under seal, particularly in this phase of the case. Eventually, a lot more things are going to be released. So I would say over the next few days, we will likely know what the charges are. We will likely know whether Diddy will be held or whether he will be released on bail. We will know if he is released on bail, what are the conditions of his bail? Meaning, can he travel? Can he go to parties? Can he work? Or is it home confinement or some version within that? We will know if there are multiple victims. My hypothesis, yes, there are. We likely will not know the names of those victims, and it is unclear to me how much details about the victims we will know because, like I said, many of them are easily identifiable, and we want to keep them safe while forever, but also particularly while the investigation is going. What else? We will also maybe know if New York is going to be the primary prosecuting body, or will there be more charges in other states? That I don't know. We saw, for example, with Harvey Weinstein, that there were New York cases and there were California cases, and they were coordinated and similar and involved similar people, but two or multiple separate cases. Also with Epstein, similarly. Though in those two cases, also, New York was a primary prosecuting body. So I don't know. But this is a big, big day. And the timing is ironic given that we were starting to talk about this. And I think there was frustration, understandably, that these raids happened a few months ago and we didn't hear anything. And I said yesterday when we taped, you will hear this later on in the episode, that there was reason that it was taking a while. And my hypothesis yesterday was that they were trying to put together a very strong case. And while we would hope that always prosecutors are trying to put together a very strong case if they're going to put a restraint on someone's liberty, particularly for someone like Diddy, who obviously has very, very competent, if not amazing, lawyers already on retainer, that this case is going to go to trial no matter what, I imagine. And if not trial, there will be a lot of ongoing litigation and attempts to suppress information. And so it was really important that when if an indictment came down, which it did today, that it be very strong. So our instinct is that this is a very strong indictment, meaning that there is a lot of evidence. It is going to be very interesting to see what his conditions of release are or are not. And I think it's important to kind of talk about our responses to this, right? Because while I don't speak for Tashira, I think this platform is pretty anti-carceral at its core, not exclusively, of course. And one of the reason it is that we so infrequently see the wheels of justice work well. And I will say from my years of practice, we so infrequently see the wheels of justice work on behalf of survivors of intimate partner violence and SA. And there is some, I don't want to say giddiness, right? I don't think we celebrate when people go to jail, but someone like Diddy, who has done allegedly such heinous things for so long in public and in private, of course. We publicly, of course, saw that atrocious video of Cassie in the hotel, him harming her. And then yesterday we talked about in Dawn Richards' suit against Diddy that she saw Diddy punch Cassie in public at a public event where there were multiple identifiable people there, including all of the harm and terror he inflicted on Dawn Richards. And so I think there's some level of justifiable relief when someone like Diddy is arrested, because it feels like, oh, the wheels of justice are working as they should. Someone like this is actually really dangerous. He has a pattern of harming people. His abuse has gotten more severe, more public, more overt, and most people over the last 2 decades have said nothing. And so maybe this is the only way to protect the public from him. And now we're going to transition to the episode we recorded yesterday before we knew of the arrest. But the timing of this is very important because it is a conversation about the ongoing criminal investigation and the ongoing civil lawsuits against Diddy.
Hey, friend.
Hey.
So more is going on regarding Diddy, aka Love, or whatever his new name is. His only new name needs to be inmate number 1234567, because it needs to be up underneath the jail. And I say that as an abolitionist because it's time. It's time. So
he goes to the island with Harvey Weinstein and Epstein and all of them.
All those nasty, despicable abusers.
R. Kelly.
Because what it feels like is more and more the entertainment industry is being exposed. Unfortunately, that also means more and more women are not being believed. But lately, something major has happened with Dawn Richard. Have you heard about the lawsuit, friend?
Yes. So I have. It is another member of Dan Diddy Kane who has come forward with very similar allegations to what we have also heard, and experiences in her lawsuit where she saw not only her own experiences of vile abuse and kidnapping, but also her experiences seeing Diddy abuse Cassie.
And I have so many questions for you as someone who is an expert on intimate partner violence. But before we get there, I do want to pull up the LA Times because they kind of categorize her lawsuit in this way. It says that she accused her former boss of SA, harassment and inhumane treatment, alleging that Combs groped, caressed, and grabbed her without her consent, falsely imprisoned her and forced her to remain at his various residences while depriving her and her bandmates of basic needs such as adequate food and sleep. So very despicable, like predator abuser behavior for sure.
So I am not surprised. What we know about intimate partner violence in SA, it's typically not one incident. And it's not one behavior. It's escalating behavior that becomes more and more and more lethal and more harmful to control their victim. And so what we see with Diddy in all of these lawsuits, even though they're allegations, to me, the more lawsuits that come out with more specifics and more specifics of similar behaviors, the more believable. First of all, I'm just going to say I believe all his victims, and I believed the first time anyone came out. But in terms of the pervasiveness of the harm and how many people he hurt, the more people come forward with more specific allegations that are consistent with other people's allegations, the more believable it is.
So let me ask you a question, because in previous lawsuits, they have kind of suggested certain celebrities without mentioning them. But Dawn is clear. She says that there was one time they were at a dinner that was right before the Bad Boy Interscope deal. The Interscope Records CEO or head of that label was at this dinner, and Diddy punched Cassie in the stomach so violently that she killed over in pain, started to cry. She was escorted out of the dinner, sent home with some handler, security, or another. But this was a table full of people, Margo. And some of the guests that were there was also Usher and Neo. So in your experience, why don't people get involved?
Well, bystander involvement is tricky. And I think it harkens back a lot to kind of the old adage of like what happens in private, right? What happens in the home. But what we see and what Cassie has said publicly, right, is that there were so many people that could have intervened that didn't. And could have helped.
Absolutely.
And I think the question is, why didn't they?
I want to kind of break that apart, because one of the things Don says is that there was one time where he had his security to lock her in a car, and they locked her in a car that didn't have any handles so that she couldn't exit the car. And she's kicking, she's screaming, she's begging, she's pleading. They refuse to let her out. She has to call her father, who was in Baltimore. Now, anyone who knows anything about this area, Baltimore is about 3.5, 4 hours away from New York. Her dad drives from Baltimore to New York. She's still in the car, Margo. And when her dad came and demanded that she be let out, what Diddy said to him was, I'll end your daughter's career. People go missing, like this veiled threat of violence. But it was this idea that her career would be over. So there seems to be something about him always threatening to people that I'll ruin you in the music industry. You won't be able to create any more music. I'll make sure you get blackballed and blacklisted. So he's holding people's dreams.
Yeah. And so that's another form of power, right? Particularly in an industry where so few people find success, and so few women, and so few Black women. And at that moment in time, more so than now, he had so much power. Mm-hmm. So it was another form of abuse. It was a sword.
I just want to say to anybody who is dealing with, even if it's not this heinous, any form of coercive behavior that just doesn't feel good to you, I don't care if it is harassment on your job. There is nobody that can make or break you. No one has the power of your career, your fate, or your destiny in their hands. And they create this narrative around them so they can have more control and they can commit more abuse, as Margo just said. It's absolutely not true, Em, because I remember I used to think that my abuser was the smartest person in the world. And let me just say that I thought this when I was a law student at Georgetown, a top tier law school in the country. It's just what it is. So I don't say that to brag. That's just factual. This man barely graduated high school. And obviously people who don't have formal educations can be just as bright as anyone else. But the fact that I had convinced myself that my abuser was smarter than me and knew more about me and therefore deserved to have this power over me. And I remember telling a friend that she was the first one that was like, he's read some books, Tashira. He's not that smart. And it took that crack, that chip in the armor, for me to start to awaken to the fact that, oh, I've just been told this over and over and over again. Either directly.
It's part of the abuse.
It is part of the abuse, of the cycle of abuse. It is not true.
And, you've had to remind me even, right, in certain business dealings that not one person, no matter who they are, is going to ruin something that they haven't started.
No, Diddy doesn't, he never did. He never owned the voice of Don Richard. Like he never owned the talent of any of the people that he exploited on his label. Like the God-given talent, right? The inherent talent that they had. He exploited it. He abused it. That was his role and nothing more.
Mm-hmm.
But we are told to believe something different. So obviously, Margo, again and again, now we already know the script has been played. People are saying that she's lying. Why now? Why now? Why now? When people ask you why now, what do you say?
Because they weren't able to before. It wasn't safe.
Period.
I just don't think this is anything anyone would want. And I think in this case in particular, sure, there's money at stake, of course, but everything we've heard about him is so terrifying. The Rolling Stone article where he threatened to kill the editor of Vibe, right? The situation with Cassie that not only did we read about, but we saw in real time. That other woman in Danity Kane who talked about the years of abuse she suffered. What was her name?
Talking about Aubrey? Or
Aubrey O'Day.
And mind you, Aubrey was one of the first people who
long time ago.
And obviously
no one believed her.
Could not say a whole lot. I'm waiting on Aubrey's lawsuit because I think that's really going to be damning.
I don't know if she'll be able to. I think she's probably signed something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, she could, but it is probably, if it in the course of history, if it's ever going to be safe to file a lawsuit against Diddy, now's probably the time, because he's under so much surveillance and he has so much at stake now. The jig is up, right? He is facing lots of civil suits, but also criminal allegations. And so I would argue, not being an expert in this case, but that it wasn't safe for her to file 10 years ago or 5 years ago or last year. And it's only really taken till now where there has been this kind of wave of lawsuits that are very consistent with what she experienced as well, where she can do it and feel relatively safe.
Can you tell us, friend, about, so I know the FBI did a raid on his, I think, Miami home. You made a really good point about how the abuse almost becomes scaffolded. Like if you get away with it, you just keep getting worse and worse. And that is to the point where he's doing this publicly. He's naked, running down a hallway, right? So it is absolutely no accountability is how he's moved about the world. So from that standpoint, I would believe that it is going on to this day and possibly in this very moment. So where are the criminal charges?
Well, I don't know. So there's a couple things. I don't know. I think depending on where, so we know that there are allegations in multiple states. We know there are allegations in New York, we know there are allegations in California, and we know there are allegations in Florida, I believe. And each of those states has what is called different statutes of limitations, meaning different time lengths where law enforcement can file charges against someone for certain crimes.
Okay.
So, depending on what the allegations are, maybe the statutes of limitations have run and he no longer could face criminal charges. Or maybe they're trying to build bigger, stronger cases with more victims so that when they do drop them, he has more incentive to plea. So they could be building a case. That's one of my hypotheses. I know the Cassie case where the one from the video, at the time she didn't engage with law enforcement, so there were no charges filed. Okay. Then my instinct is that in the settlement she had with him, she agreed not to pursue any criminal charges. That's my hypothesis.
Well, we don't know that.
But we don't know that.
And it feels like the feds don't come kicking through your door unless they have some serious information and they are trying to build a case. And
I also think that we want things done. Like, we think something's going on, we want an arrest made. And I have that proclivity. I imagine what the feds are trying to do is build a multi-state case.
Okay.
So they're building a case in Florida, in California. Maybe they're trying to, let's say, see if there's been trafficking.
That's what I was.
Which are much more serious charges when there's multi-state involvement. So that would be my hypothesis. I agree. It feels like it's taking a long time, but he could also be under some sort of sealed indictment, right? We just haven't heard from him, which also makes me think his lawyers are saying, like, don't do or say anything. But I don't know.
Yeah. Speaking of don't do or say anything, I do want to go on record for us and say that according to TMZ's reporting that the other member of Diddy Dirty Money, so if folks remember, Dandy Kane sunsetted, Diddy then came out with this group called Diddy Dirty Money, and it included a woman named Kalina Harper and Don Richard. And so the second woman, although Kalina's information or her name was mentioned several times, I think 30-something times, 33 times, says TMZ in the lawsuit, Kalina has said, I fully respect Dawn's right to recount her experiences. However, I want to emphasize that her account reflects her personal perspective and should not be interpreted as a universal truth applicable to everyone involved.
So she didn't write that. A lawyer wrote that.
100%.
And to me, I read that. I'm wondering what you think. I read that as his lawyers got to her first and bought her off.
That's how I read it. Yeah, for sure. I think we have to acknowledge the manipulation that is done behind the scenes with people who are powerful and have a lot of money. They do not face investigations, civil nor criminal lawsuits in the way that everyday people do at all. I mean, Diddy has had a team of powerful attorneys on retainer for many years, if not decades at this point. And so when things like this arise, they already know oftentimes about the filing before it even happens. That is their job. And so, yes, I definitely believe that she was likely paid off, bought off very early, because notice that the statement does not deny, it just says that wasn't, she's speaking on her behalf and not for me. So.
But I think there's also this, I think there could be some jumping to criticizing her. And while I feel that, right, I also just want us to kind of remember how much fear this man has inflicted on everyone he's touched, particularly women, but also men. Remember, one of the lawsuits was from a man.
Exactly. And I mean, and there are people who still talk about him. One of the guys from Miami, I cannot think of his name right now. I know you all probably know it, from Making the Band, talks about going through deep, like dark times post his time being around Diddy and the things that he witnessed and how he and the other bandmates were treated. And so they could very well all be going through a type of PTSD. Unfortunately, that like the music industry just, I think, breeds in people who, like you said, want it so bad. And then you have an abuser like Diddy who is controlling what you can eat, where you sleep, if you can sleep. Dawn said they would be forced to practice and rehearse sometimes for days at a time without sleep.
That's like a human rights violation. And right, all of these things build on each other, right? So they're not getting enough food. A calorie deficit can cause also mind-altering sensations. They're not sleeping enough. We know ongoing, I mean, you know how important sleep is to me, but withholding people's sleep is a form of torture.
Hey.
Right? So all of these people were harmed by him in the name of productivity.
And can I just bring up the abuse in that as well? Because I will never forget that being a part of what happened to the victims of Keith Raniere and how we reported as journalists on that extensively. And it was you, I think, who pointed that out to me, that this idea of controlling someone's food and restricting their caloric intake, yes, is actually a common experience of abusers and people who have been abused and victimized. And so not being able to sleep and not being able to eat, that's a playbook that we see over and over again with abusers.
And I think like Diddy was able to do so much of it so overtly in the name of mentoring or success, right? Like, oh, just change your body a little bit. Oh, you need to practice this a little bit more. But it was all abusive.
Yeah.
I mean,
or you got to pay your dues. This is what it takes to make it. And there are people who, and I'm not saying that the music industry is perfect. I'm not in it. I'm not in entertainment in that way. But there are people who don't have that experience who have made it. And so
mhm.
we've got to stop normalizing this abusive power construct. That means you just lay yourself down, right? You allow for yourself to be trampled over. And if not, you don't deserve success. It's not true musically. It's not true in any career path. And it's not true in any interpersonal relationship. You do not deserve to be treated that way.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
But you know what you said in the previous episodes also sticking with me too, Margo. You talked about who holds these people accountable. And for Usher, Neo, other people to have been sitting around the table, who says enough is enough? How do we stop this moving forward?
Why doesn't someone, when they interview Usher tonight before his show, ask him that?
Hey, Shondo.
Right? I mean, he's on a worldwide tour where people are falling over because he's such an amazing performer. He could be an amazing performer. He also could have turned a blind eye to something or participated. We don't even know.
We don't.
But no one wants to ask him. It's okay. He's a big boy.
Mm-hmm. That part. But because you know what? Because they fear that they're going to be blackballed and that their access to him is going to be restricted. And so at some point, our pull to do the right thing has to be greater than our fear of being blacklisted, blackballed, or not being able to be successful in a very myopic way. Fuck them. Abusers don't deserve protection. And that's just that on that.
No.
So this will, I'm sure, continue. I mean, we said from the beginning that this was just the tip of the iceberg. I am, again, very interested in knowing what criminal charges might be pending or happening behind the scenes. But at the very least, we should go on record to say, as you have, that we stand with all victims of intimate partner violence or intimate violence in any way, domestic
Absolutely.
violence, SA, etc. And we stand with Dawn. And I also want to say that she had the option of not listing her name in this lawsuit. She could have been a Jane Doe, and she decided not to do it. So thank you, Dawn, for your courage.
Absolutely. Thank you for your courage. And this is not going to be the end of this. This is just the beginning, I would imagine. So stay tuned. We'll keep our eye on the news around this as well.
And go back to our previous episodes. If you missed any of them, we have covered the Diddy cases since the beginning, right, friend?
Yes, and we also did a whole episode really early on during the first season 2 years ago about when people in power do bad things. I think it was episode 2 or 3, so we'll link that below as well.
All right, friend. What's one thing that you were going to do for yourself today?
Well, I don't know if this is so much for myself, but I need to share with people because it's so cute. So my daughter just started ballet. And for those who don't know, I used to be a ballet dancer. I have 3 daughters, but the first 2 really hated ballet. The last one really likes it. Well, she's had 1 class, but look at this.
Oh, friend. I hope she loves it.
Look at the skirt.
Girl, not the... First of all, this is so hard. First of all, she would wear this like on a Wednesday to
No, she wanted to wear it to school, but I said no.
Yeah. So just know that this is so her.
So I get to watch that. That's so cute. And then just a low-key evening. Monday. What about you?
It's a Monday. I am about to dig into a new book, friend. So I have been reading. I'm almost halfway through Twilight.
Oh yeah, that book. I saw that in our hotel room, and I was like, "Wow, Tashaira's really smart."
Very light reading.
I
It's
was
about
like,
the rise of authoritarianism. So this has been really good, and it actually has been making a lot of sense of the world right now. But I promised myself that I won't get too deep into that kind of stuff, and so I'm gonna also jump back into Queenie, which I started and did not finish. So, and this is actually now for folks who maybe don't want to read it. It is now also, I believe, either a Hulu or a Netflix show. So
I think it's a Hulu show. I think I've seen that. I mean, I've seen that. I haven't seen it. I've seen the ads for it.
So I'm excited. I'm gonna end work early, and I'm gonna sit on the couch and read, girl. And I don't want to say this because it makes me sound really juvenile, but cuddle with my grandma. So
sweet.
That's the actual truth.
Well, tell her I say hi. I want to cuddle with her too.
I will. She would actually love that.
I know. Okay, friend. Well, stay tuned and drop your questions below, and we'll keep our eye on this troubling news.
We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening to Justice. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to learn more about our podcast, be sure to check us out on our website at justicepodcast.com. You can also reach out to us there if you want to be featured on the show, or if you have a business or a product that you think would be a good fit for our audience. Thanks again for listening.